Okay, hi, I'm Rusty Dornan. I'm the Vice President of Operations and Production for the Kaufman Fellows Academy. We're back with you again with Miriam Rivera because we had a few technical problems and we didn't get all those great questions that all of you guys asked. So we're going to go back through with Miriam and ask a few of the questions that the students submitted. And hopefully you can have the answers that you were looking for. So Miriam, really, what are some of the best practices for a founder to evaluate yourself? How tough is that?
Evaluating yourself is a very difficult thing. It does help to have some criteria in terms of what a CEO is supposed to be doing within the company. In fact, I'll try to post an article about first-time CEOs and what they may want to be trying to accomplish, because I think sometimes there's an overwhelming job to do, and it's hard to know what you should be doing. The real way that I think you should evaluate yourself is to get feedback from people that you're working with, both on your team, anybody that's a board member, investor, as well as even customers. And not necessarily in terms of you yourself, but how are you delivering services to them? Are you giving them what they thought they were going to get when they entered into a business relationship with you? I think those are really the important things that you're trying to accomplish. In terms of management, I often recommend that people do work with an executive coach or work with a mentor if they have one, that they can bounce ideas off of issues that come up in their companies, because a lot of the times you can't really talk to people that are working for you about some of the doubts that you have or some of the challenges you have, and you need to be able to talk with somebody outside the company about those.
Okay. That last question came from Ariel Ness. This one is, how do you decide if someone is a co-founder at what % of ownership, or if they're just an early stage hire with some options? How do you decide to?
Well, what makes somebody a founder is that you think that by bringing them on board, they are really going to add significant value to the company, and that it is something much more than what you would expect from an employee. Some of that is about how much commitment somebody has to your company in terms of what their willingness is to work, and what their areas of contribution can be. They may have such a broad set of experiences that they can really help you in a lot of different areas, or they can help you in some specific way that they've demonstrated elsewhere and that you believe is really going to be critical to developing your business. That said, I will say that the act of calling someone a founder is a very different thing than the act of giving them equity. And oftentimes you'll hear people, many people talked of as founders within a company. And at Google, I think they probably talked about the first 100 founders in the company. So, I don't know that that would really qualify, but the sense is that you want everyone to feel like they're a founder in your company. And frankly, the first even 200 people ended up being less than 1% of the employees of the company over time. So they really were the founders of the company in the sense that they helped to build all the teams that ultimately became this great company. So don't be too stingy with the founder title. Equity should be determined much more objectively in terms of compensation studies and other information that you get from the market. And that's kind of the difference between having somebody called a founder and having someone receive large pieces of equity.
And that's thanks to Emil Safler for that question. The next one is from Faris Zahir. Startups operating in immature ecosystems often deal with limited talent pools. What do you do if you hit that growth stage and you have to scale quickly?
Well, I have to say this is a problem not just in emerging economies, but even in other parts of the United States, where we've made investments. And one reason we typically, as seed stage investors, focus on Silicon Valley is the depth of talent that is available here to our startups. When you're thinking about starting a company in one geography and you know that it has limits, I think part of it is, do you have business relationships in other parts of the world or other parts of the country that you think you can draw on to build a team remotely? I have seen people do this, for example, who have For example, one startup had a number of people who had a depth of engineering experience overseas with Swedish engineers. And that startup is continuing to hire Swedish talent through an incubator in Sweden because, one, they have excellent engineers in Sweden. Two, they don't have as many opportunities. In fact, because some of the Swedish companies that have been in telephony are scaling down, there's actually a surplus of talent in that area. And they had those kind of relationships to create teams in that geography. So part of it is on your team, do you have people that have experience managing in other areas where there is the kind of talent that you're looking for, whether it be engineering or business skills, and whether other parts of your business might be outsourced or partnered with as opposed to run by internal hiring.
Our next question is from Vara Prasad, and I think this is a classic startup question. How do you attract talent in a bootstrapped early stage startup when you're still working on that first version of the product and you don't have any customers?
Really, it's about passion at that point, to be honest. What we see are companies that are able to attract phenomenal talent because people have demonstrated some form of excellence and achievement in other areas, but they're still looking for a way to make a difference with the work that they're doing. And they don't necessarily feel like continuing to do, let's say, SEO in one other advertising company is going to make a difference in the world. And they think they can apply that to a more meaningful area. One of my companies is in the immigration space, for example, and they've been able to hire significant marketing talent because it's an area that that person feels will make a difference in people's lives. So a lot of it is about finding the right fit in terms of your passion, your company, and the point in people's careers and lives where they're looking to do something more meaningful.
Our next question is from Stephen Webster, and I do want to give a shout out to Stephen. Stephen has been, many of you who have joined the forums have seen that Stephen has stepped in to try and help people and has really been a very, very active member of the Startup CEO class. So we at KFA would like to really thank you for doing that, Stephen.
Yeah, I think that kind of teamwork is really what it's about, and the
Absolutely.
value of a network is all about how actionable it is. So the more that you help each other, the more that you're going to get out of this class, and the more that these relationships are going to serve you in the future. And I'm just constantly amazed at how many people I might have helped in one small area and how later on it comes to benefit me, and how many times I'm at a conference and somebody will come up and say, oh, we met at such and such and you did this for me, and I just want to give you the follow-up on what happened. And it's just a really gratifying thing to see people like Stephen and the contributions you're making to the class.
Okay, so Stephen's question. His startup, stealthygruntfunding.com, is trying to shift bootstrap startup towards dynamic equity split models to avoid the Facebook scenario you had described in the earlier interview.
Who's doing this? Sorry.
This is Stephen.
Okay.
Okay, do you have a point of view on dynamic equity splits in the early stages?
Well, I'm not 100% sure that I understand what a dynamic equity split is, but I do understand the concept that at different points in time, there may be different amounts of equity that founders receive based on their participation in the company and the amount of effort and or results that they're achieving for the company. So I think Noam Wasserman talks a bit about this in his book. And my sense is that as long as people are very clear on what the expectations are to receive different amounts of equity. So for example, let's say you have a person who's been very active in your business and is a potential founder, but they have been working a full-time job and they're working a part-time role with you. They may be either an advisor or maybe they're a technologist that's working at a different company and working part-time for you. The sense that at some point they're going to need to pull the trigger and actually leave their jobs and join you, for example, is definitely a good reason to have dynamic equity splitting, because they may never leave the company that they work for, or they may leave now that another person has taken the time and trouble to really build it into something, and it would be a good place to land. And that is not when you kind of need to give somebody, 50% or 30% of the equity in your company. So I'm for this notion that people understand what they get, when they get it, and that packages do change over time depending on the contribution and commitment that people have.
Great. We have one from Adam Lewis. How much focus do you put on benefits in addition to equity to attract talent at the beginning? Do you think people are willing to take a risk at a startup care enough to pass up the job if they don't get benefits? Trying to gauge the onboarding of benefits and which ones matter the most.
Well, I think in Silicon Valley we definitely compete on benefits, but that's in part because it's a really competitive environment anyway, and you'll see some of the strange benefits that companies have. For example, free food is one that's really common here, either lunches that are brought in or snacks. Another one at Google was massages. And yes, people did have this almost from the very beginning. We had a massage therapist because of carpal tunnel syndrome and people coding a million lines of code to build the Google software. And so I certainly think that benefits are one way that you compete for talent, but they're kind of idiosyncratic to what people value in your community. So, for example, one startup that I talked to in Brazil has a $5 a day Starbucks budget with the Starbucks downstairs because Brazilians really value good coffee. So, try to find inexpensive things that really matter to the people you work with, as opposed to competing against high-level corporate benefits like, 6 months of maternity leave, for example, like Google might offer. It's just not a very affordable proposition and not necessarily a desirable one in an early-stage company where all hands on deck is an important part of the culture.
And I think Matt talks about it in the class as well, where, if you're in New York, money matters. If you're in Boulder, Colorado, time and time off is what matters. So I think even sometimes geography can have something to do with what people would prefer or your team and getting to know that some people might want one benefit over another.
Right. Fitness matters in Silicon Valley, for example. You see a lot of gyms. You see a lot of people working out. The founders used to go play roller hockey in the parking lots. We had an annual ski trip. So things that matter in your culture are what's important to give. And certainly some of these things are really about productivity. If you think providing free lunch is just to be kind, it's not. It's basically a way to keep people at work and having them not lose like 2 hours trying to drive back and forth to restaurants and get a reservation and then eat their meal. It really is a much more productive environment if you're providing food and it's really quick and easy for them to get it.
Okay, we're going to just do maybe two more. Shiva Reddy asks, what are rules of thumb for equity distribution? Example, how much equity is given to the head of engineering / marketing, senior engineers, etc.?
So specific equity is totally market-based, and it'll depend on the specific market in which you're hiring. So, for example, in Silicon Valley, when we're looking at hiring, we try to get equity and compensation studies that are applicable in this geography, and that might not even hold true for New York, for example. So, the thing is to try to get market information based on either publicly available sources, private sources, venture capitalists in your area. They're people that, if they're interested in you and you're in conversations, even if you're at an angel stage, but you have some of these kinds of relationships, you can definitely use them to try to pursue this because they will want the equity structure in your company to make sense for when they're potentially going to make an investment. So it's not like it's so secret. It's just that it costs money to get this data. And so you need to have somebody who's willing to share a costly resource with you.
And for our final question is Keith Stewart, and I think this is also a classic startup dilemma. How do you handle a situation where an early member, a founder of the startup, has been given a significant share of the company, but is really not doing their fair share of work?
Yeah, well, and we have talked a bit about this because this is a really common scenario where people start a company together and either because their expectations of what they wanted to build in the company are different. You know, that happens all the time. Somebody thinks we're going to have the first lifestyle startup in Silicon Valley. And you're initially like, cool. But then all of a sudden you realize, like, I am so competitive and I want to win. I want to beat my competitors, and I'm willing to stay up and work late. And, you know, my weekend ski house just doesn't mean as much to me as I thought it would now that my company's really growing quickly. So, you know, things are going to shift. I think the main thing to realize is that sometimes the equity shifts and other times it doesn't. For example, one gentleman that I met who had built a company that he took public, and he's now a much more senior person. He started the company when he was relatively young, and one of his professors was one of the founders in the company, and they did what I typically don't say you should do, which is they split the equity a third, a third, a third. And so he and the other founder that were more active had an understanding that this third person would not be quite as active as they in running the company. But over time, it was really a significant difference. And from time to time, you know, this person was spending a real fraction of the time that that they were spending in building the company, the two other founders. But one thing that they all acknowledged was that that person had had such a significant impact in the early stage of the company in getting it funded and getting it started and giving it credibility with customers that they were not going to change that equity split. So one is, and that's kind of what I mean when I talk about the butterfly effect, that sometimes early people make contributions that help create the whole rest of your company. And it's hard to put a value on that because it's so early, you don't really see the impact of it, but this particular group of founders felt that they would honor their agreement because those early customers, that credibility, that financing, they did not believe would have happened without the contribution and presence of that third founder who never did come on as a full-time person. So it is going to vary a lot, but I think the understanding is about the contributions that people make and understanding the significance of them, and that it's a lot harder to make a significant contribution early on that has enduring value, and they believe that this founder did.
Well, Miriam, thanks for joining us. Again, we still may have you back and to do another Hangout. And again, our apologies on not having some of these questions asked live during the Hangout, but we had Miriam for almost twice as long, so we got twice as many questions
And
answered.
I'm really glad that you guys did ask questions because I was getting worried. Nobody's out there.
We couldn't see the questions for some reason.
Thank you so much for sharing your concerns.
Great. Thanks a lot.